To another debate on Beacon Hill today, which concerns the rights of terminally ill people. At issue is whether they should be allowed in Massachusetts, as they are now in 5 other states, to self-administer medication prescribed by a doctor, which would bring about their death when they believe the time is right. Last year around this time, a 29-year-old California woman gained national attention with her advocacy for this cause. Brittany Menard and her husband moved from their home in California to Oregon to take advantage of its death with dignity law after she was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And she recorded a video explaining why. Here's a small piece of it.
I am dying, and I refuse to lose my dignity. I refuse to subject myself and my family to purposeless, prolonged pain and suffering at the hands of an incurable disease. Death with dignity laws authorize the medical practice of aid in dying. They give mentally competent, terminally ill adults the option to request life-ending medication that they can choose to ingest if their dying process becomes unbearable. The freedom of this patient right is choice.
Brittany Menard died on November 1st, the day she decided the time was right. Now her husband, Dan Diaz, is continuing on with her cause. He was among those who testified at today's State House hearing, and he joined me yesterday to talk about why this cause remains so important to him. Dan, it's good to meet you. Thanks so much for being here. So you gave up your job to become a full-time advocate for what your wife just talked about. Why not leave it to the pros? Why do it yourself? What's the agenda here?
I made a promise to my wife to do whatever I can to help move legislation along so that nobody else would have to go through what she went through, leaving our home at the end of life like that.
Speaking of move, when I read the story, which I've read many times, you guys have to get in a car, drive 12 hours from California to Oregon, 12 hours, whatever it is, 500-600 miles,
right.
Leave life behind that you'd both become accustomed to, just so she can end her life the way she wants to do it. I mean, how torturous is that? Not only that she's dying,
right,
but you got to go through this whole experience.
Right, in the middle of the chaos of being told that she has a brain tumor, that she will die within 6 months, and that dying process is not going to be a gentle one. The idea that we had to go through that, leave our home, leave our friends, our community, her medical team, that's the reason that Brittany spoke up. And that's the reason that she did not set out to be the face of this movement, as she's been labeled, but she did want people to recognize that people shouldn't have to go through what she was going through, and so she made that video.
After she made that video, did she live long enough to realize the impact that she was going to have on the world on this issue that mattered so much to her and you and her family?
On October 6th, when all of the media coverage hit, Brittany died November 1st. Right. So between October 6th and November 1st, the 12 million hits on YouTube and everything, she was aware that her voice certainly was making a difference. And with pride, I continue to forward that legacy.
Speaking of pride, I didn't know your wife, but I'm sure from what I've read about her, she'd be very proud of you. But isn't this hard? You have to watch that video repeatedly. I read a story over the weekend about you lying down in bed with your wife as she's dying. I mean, to do what you do, you have to relive the horror of losing your wife, like with every legislator you talk to. How do you do that?
The emotion is certainly there, and at times, the voice gets shaky. But there is also a certain amount of therapy in it for me. That when I tell Brittany's story, it comes up now, it's the therapy in it for me is that I am keeping my promise to her, and I'm keeping her legacy around. And making a difference for the rest of us, for you and me, that hopefully we're never in that predicament, but if we are, we at least know that Brittany paved the way so that we would be able to stay at home.
Speaking of paving the way, I don't know if people know that the most significant victory in the Death with Dignity movement was when Jerry Brown, the governor of California, signed a law that made the largest state in America part of this deal. Your wife essentially lobbied him, right? He called her on the phone, 3 days before she died in Oregon?
That's right.
And she made the case, essentially, when he was still sort of on the fence, right?
Well, Brittany talked to the governor 3 days before she died. They had a good conversation. He did not give any indication on, which way that he was leaning one way or the other, because, of course, that was a full year before, it was in front of him as legislation. But she was very determined and very persuasive, and made her point to him. And I'm hopeful that he remembers and
Well,
did
he said
remember
in his
that.
signings that when he signed, he talked
He
about
did
his
mention her by
almost
name.
being a priest, that as being a Jesuit, and he mentioned your wife as part of what moved him.
Yeah.
You know, we should also say the impact your wife had in the last year. She died November 1st, obviously almost exactly a year. 58% of Americans supported doctors being able to help legally people to die in their own way if they're terminally ill. It's up to 68%, a 10% increase.
Right.
I'm sure not coincidentally. Your wife is powerful. You're doing an important job. The Pope is on the other side, a pretty respected person. A lot of disability rights advocates are on the other side. It's terminally ill today, they say, disabled tomorrow. An older person who's sick is going to say, I don't want to be a burden to my family anymore. I'm going to take this drug even though I don't want to because I don't want my husband to have to. So where are they wrong, Dan Diaz?
The safeguards are in place. The language in the bill expressly denies. You do not qualify for this bill simply because you are old. You do not qualify for this bill because you are disabled. A person that is living with a disability is a much different category than my wife, Brittany. Brittany was told that in 6 months, you will die. That is much different, and had she been given the option of simply being told, you will continue to live, you will be disabled, but you will be living with a disability, that is completely different.
But do you worry about the slippery slope? Their argument is, yeah, I see what the language is now, but once you get your foot in the door, it's going to get wider and wider and wider, no?
17 years of legislation, of this being legislation in Oregon, there's absolutely no evidence of that.
And we should say in Oregon, for those who think this has become like everybody's rushing to do this, in almost 20 years, roughly 1,200 people have sought the prescription, only 800 have ended up using the prescription.
That's right.
So it's not like people are rushing to their
No,
doctors.
this affects such a small percentage. It's a fraction of a percent of the people who find themselves in this predicament. They have to apply for, qualify for, finally be granted the prescription with all the safeguards. I do not agree at all with that slippery slope argument. And
Okay.
the evidence shows that it's not true.
So there's a hearing at the State House. My sense, as someone who used to be a fairly ineffective lobbyist at Beacon Hill, but I know it a little bit, is a lot of people, even those who are on the fence, are going to say the people just voted on this thing. And while it was narrow loss, 51 to 49 on the ballot, we can't reverse their decision so quickly. Assuming that argument carries the day, are you guys and your movement not only willing to fight for a law, but willing to put this question back on the ballot and make the case to the people of Massachusetts?
Yes, I would say the one thing that's changed, because the last time I think it was on the ballot in Massachusetts was 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, I think so.
So-
Yeah.
So the one thing that has changed now, I would say, is Brittany. She's brought this around where now people recognize the reality of this legislation and the vital importance of it to a terminally ill individual. Our hope would be that we move this through legislatively, but if necessary, we know we have the support in Massachusetts. So at this point, polling shows that close to 70% or 74% of those in Massachusetts agree that a person should have this end-of-life option. If it goes to the ballot, I think we would be successful there too. We'd like to see it get through legislatively, though.
I know this is a bittersweet week for you. First birthday of yours without Brittany.
Yeah.
But the flip side is you're spending your birthday fighting for something she cared about. So Dan Diaz, happy birthday and lots of luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good to see
Appreciate
you.
it.